Video for Project 1A. First, I'll be going over the demo of the program, and then I will go over the changes I made to the code. And I'm going to run it. And as you can see here, I have the 10 by 10 grid, and for the y-axis I drew in green pointing up, and then for the z-axis I drawn in blue, and then for the x-axis I drawn in red. And I can also move the camera around the scene too, and to do that I have to press the C key to select the camera, and then I can move around using the arrow keys. And to move parallel or along the equator, I use the left or right arrow keys, and to move orthogonal to the equator, I use the up or down arrow keys. And as you can see, and I'm just gonna keep moving around just to demonstrate that my camera actually works. We'll go under, move around, go back up again, move around, and yeah, and that's it for the camera. And as you can see here, I also have my robot arm. And so this is the base, this is the first arm, this is the joint, and then this is the second arm. And I'm gonna show that in Blender too. And this is my model. I have everything centered at the origin because when I imported it in my OpenGL program, everything would be centered correctly at the origin too. Otherwise, everything would just be at random places, and which would make it difficult. And yeah, and I'm gonna go back to the code. And to draw the axis, I just drew like a simple line. So to draw the x-axis, I drew a line from the origin, so 0, 0, 0 to the point 500. So that would make a line of 5 unit length, and then I pass in the color red, and I did the same thing for the y and the z-axis accordingly. And yeah, and I use indices to tell OpenGL that to draw a line in this particular order. And for the grid, the way I drew it was I drew it so line by line. So first I would draw this line, so vertical, a horizontal line, this line, and then this line, then this line, and then I do that 11 times inside this loop because there's 11 lines. So yeah, and to make sure everything is like centered correctly and everything is evenly spaced out, so I just use like a gap variable, which is of 1 unit length. So each of these I guess small rectangles would have 1 by 1 dimensions. And yeah, and for this if statement, I make sure I did this if statement because when I draw the axis, it would overlap some part of the grid, and if I draw the grid and the axis on top of each other, it would cause some sort of flickering effect. And so I kind of prevented that from happening by not drawing the grid at this particular point or line. And I did the same thing for the other part too. And then yeah, and then after that I just did like regular OpenGL stuff to draw objects on the screen. So I bind the vertex array, and I call the vertex attribute, and then I enable them. And then down in the draw function, I binded the VAO, and then I call GL draw arrays, and then I drew lines, and then I drew 44 lines because, oh, not 44 lines, but 44 vertices because each line have 2 vertices, and I drew 22 lines in total. So 22 lines multiplied by 2 is 44. And next for the cameras, so again, for the default angles, I have it set at 30 and 35 for the parallel and orthogonal respectively. And when I press the arrow keys, I just change the appropriate camera angle by a certain angle offset or amount, and I multiply that by delta time to make sure that the change is not dependent on the frame rate. And I define the delta time function as a difference between the current frame and then the time since the current frame, and then the last time between the current and the last time. And to actually move the camera around, I use spherical coordinates. So as you can see here, the x coordinate would have this particular formula, and then the y axis, the y coordinate will have this formula. But in my case, I have to switch the z and y coordinates around because the y coordinate is actually pointing up this time, and then I call the radius. I multiply by the radius to make sure the camera is far away enough to capture all of the scene, and then I pass in the coordinates to the locate function, this one. And lastly, up here I created 4 meshed objects variables, and then I pass in the appropriate path to the correct object, and after that I just manually translated them to make sure that they're in the correct spot to form the robot arm. And inside the mesh object, I modified the constructor to accept a path to the object, and then down here I call the load object function, and then I pass in the path, and then I pass in these placeholder arrays to make sure everything is to make sure that everything is being filled. And after that, I have to I guess flatten the vertices this vertice array because it's an array of vector 3D vectors, and I want them to be an array of floats. And so to do that, I just kind of manually loop through the vertices of vectors, and then I just individually push it to the float arrays. And yeah, and that's what I did. And yeah, I think that's it for all the tasks. And yeah, and then after that, I called the draw method on each of the objects. And yeah, that's it for my project. Thank you.